Well, he's been doing it for years and years now, and I first met him when he was working with my friend Andrew Breitbart. James O'Keefe and his Project Veritas has been, for the last half decade, in my opinion, the most valuable piece on the board. However, just a few days ago, he got himself into a little bit of trouble, and I think the interesting part of this question is, where does this line actually belong? Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And this is your right angle on James O'Keefe being busted by the Washington Post, I think it was, right, guys? For having planted a person to tell a false story about the judge in Alabama to see if the Post would buy the story and run with it, even though it wasn't true. This, to me, I remember when I heard the news, I thought James O'Keefe, who I know somewhat personally, and who I admire enormously. I remember thinking, I think this one was a bridge too far, James. I think this was a bridge too far. And then I come back to the fact that the only reason I ever heard the name James O'Keefe was because he went into a series of Acorn offices dressed as a cartoon image of a pimp with his then business partner Hannah Giles, and found again and again and again and again and again that Acorn was more than willing to set up government funding and permits for him to run a prostitute ring. So those are plants. That's not just reporting. That was a sting kind of operation. So the question is, where is the line? And I don't know. Scott, what do you think about this? I have a good feeling, needless to say, that James O'Keefe has done many attempts to do a sting operation like this where either the person didn't say anything incriminating or it didn't work out or so on, but the fact that the Washington Post beat him to the punch and basically exposed him made him look extremely underhanded and sneaky. And look, a lot of what he's doing is underhanded and sneaky. Is it a case of the road to hell being paved with good intentions?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I'll tell you, what it makes me think of is actually undercover law enforcement operations, although those have behind them, the force of law. But, when a police or other government agencies become so embedded with evildoers that they essentially become part of the evil, when they're supplying false bomb parts to guys that they think might be terrorists. And so they're kind of, they're baiting them along in the process, perhaps at a more accelerated rate than those people would naturally go. Then I think what you get instead of truth is a distortion. And it doesn't accurately reflect what really may be going on there. Those people may have never actually acted on any of the evil proclivities they have. And I think when you have a video, for example, that goes into an abortion clinic and talks to people about ordinary business stuff, and they talk about how, they're selling baby parts, for example, you're just sort of letting those people be themselves. That's a little different than when you go and you say, hey, I'm going to pretend that I have a salacious story about a political candidate that's really awful, and I'm going to see if I can bait the Washington Post into biting on this. Now, what it also says to me is I think that James O'Keefe, if this is possible, underestimates the integrity of the American press. Now, I'm not saying that the American press.
Sorry, your words frighten and confuse me.
I can't. It's sad to say, but because I think a lot of the bias that rankles in the American press is not so on the nose as James O'Keefe is sort of giving them credit for. I think it's more subtle. It's more of, hey, I'm surrounded by people who think this way, and so that way of thinking seeps into my writing. I don't think in general that legitimate Washington Post or New York Times reporters go out and do single source stories on that they've never heard of before and say, oh yeah, well, let's put that out without trying to corroborate it. Now, I do think they do way too much with anonymous sources. But in this case, the Washington Post did what they would normally do, and they tried to find corroboration for the story. And they actually, it didn't say this outright in the story, but it looks like they put a tail on this woman and they saw her walking into the Project Veritas office and they said, I see what's happening here. So they kind of turned the tables on him. So in a way, while much of what happens in American media is profoundly tainted with leftist progressive bias, it doesn't necessarily mean that these major scions of journalism are all out there taking any crap that comes down the transom and saying, hey, yeah, let's put this out and see what happens.
Well, Steve, Scott mentioned something that I've always found really interesting about James O'Keefe. Well, first of all, I find him completely fearless, but James O'Keefe is doing the kind of undercover work that feels like police work. I don't think he's running quite the same risks, obviously, as going into the mafia or something, no. But he is doing what he's doing is most certainly illegal in most states in the nation and under most circumstances, right? Recording people without their knowledge and so on. And he does not have the legal authority to do that presumably would mean, in the case of law enforcement, a judge has to review the case and has to issue a warrant and all the rest of it. O'Keefe's position is, I'm doing this because there's no one doing this. This is what the press is supposed to do, and the press is the enemy, and the entire idea of democracy depends on open information. Where do you stand on this line between lawlessness and investigative ambition?
Well, I'm pretty much for anything that empowers the individual against the state. Period. Full
Me
stop.
too, yeah.
On that one. The state has processes and resources that are just unimaginable to the individual, and if the state wants to come down on you, well, you're pretty much screwed. So anything that can turn those tables, I'm in favor of. But that's not what O'Keefe was doing in this case. He wasn't going after a publicly financed group like Acorn or Planned Parenthood or the Border. One of my favorite bits he ever did. It was so goofy. That's the thing people don't talk about enough. He's got this goofy charm on camera. You remember when he crossed the U.S.-Mexican border dressed as Osama bin Laden, and he's just kind of happily traipsing in that costume? It was hysterically funny. But it was also revealing about our lack of border security. That's not what he did here. I took a lot of heat a couple of weeks ago when I said that the Washington Post's reporting on Roy Moore was solid, and it was. They used multiple sources, and they vetted their stories, and they vetted their sources. And what O'Keefe tried to do proves that the Washington Post's reporting was solid, because here they had a single source that didn't pass the vetting. And I don't know what O'Keefe was thinking on this one. You're going against pros who do this for a living, that had a solid story to begin with. And what was he trying to do in this case? What was the concept behind it? To protect a guy who likes, or at least liked, to date teenage girls? I don't understand the concept. And the execution was half-hearted at best. He's a guy I respect, but he really embarrassed himself on this one, Bill. Well,
What James O'Keefe did to bring down Acorn, I thought Acorn was a criminal enterprise, and it turns out he showed that that's in fact the case. He's done incredible good work, and there's no but coming for him. I admired him for the work and the courage that he had, and then I got to know him a bit better. And in some of the times I've had to speak with him informally, just in discussions about the general aspect of what he does, he told me that they've uncovered just enormous amounts of personally damning information on people that's not relevant to the story and therefore was destroyed. I found that to have a great deal of integrity. Yeah. And I think his fundamental premise is without question true. Since there is no press looking into anything done on the left, since the press is the problem, then it's time for Project Veritas and citizens to become the press. I agree. I think he made a mistake on this one, and for the reasons that you both outlined. He wasn't going in there to hear somebody's opinion on something. He was going in there to spring a trap on somebody. But I would just say this about my friend James O'Keefe, and I've seen many times when anybody on our team gets in trouble and everybody else goes scurrying for the woods, you're not going to get that from me. And I know you guys don't feel that way either.
No.
So I'll just say this about James. And James, if you're watching this, and you can just take this from me. When I was learning how to fly a glider, I was getting ready to get my license. And in order to pass that license, you have to land within 200 feet. You can't land 1 inch short of it, but you've got to land it within 200 feet. And I put a little marker down. And as I was coming down to land, I looked down trying to find this marker, which I thought was very big, but from the air I couldn't spot, which meant that I wasn't looking forward when I landed the airplane, which means that I landed the glider on the nose, which bounced the thing back up, and the plane went up 30, 40 feet in the air. There's no engine. I can't give it the gas to go around, and it came back down again. Bam! And it went up again, and it came back down again. Bam! And it's called a pilot-induced oscillation, where the shock and the controls that you're doing are actually amplifying it. I remember thinking to myself, it's going to stop eventually. Don't bury a wing in the ground and just ride it out. But it knocked a couple things loose in the cockpit, and I couldn't get out of the airplane because my knees were so weak. Now, here's the point of all of this. I called my flight instructor, who was a friend of mine, and I said, Jeff, I think I just crashed an airplane. He said, are you okay? I said, yeah. He said, is the plane okay? I said, yeah, I think it's okay. He said, then you didn't crash the airplane. You had a hard landing. And here's the point of all of this. He said, you actually got very lucky here, Bill. You got badly scared, and it didn't cost you anything. You got badly scared, and you learned a lot, and it didn't cost you anything.
Yeah.
Not many people are that lucky. So, James, I suspect that's probably what you're going through right now. I suspect I hope you realize that sometimes there's a way of going too far. And I don't think this has hurt you permanently at all. I think if anything, I hope it's shaken you up a little bit, because your judgment will improve with experience. And the only way we get better judgment is through experience, and experience is the result of having gone through bad judgment. So you didn't break anything. Keep up the good work, and don't forget what happened to you this time, because we need you. That'll do it for this Right Angle, brought to you by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. There's just a few of us out here trying to tell the truth in a big, strong old headwind. And if you want to join the fight against these people, we'd love to have you. And you can go to BillWhittle.com and become a member and keep these messages coming. We'll see you next week here on Right Angle.